Captain Mara Bennett had flown countless flights across the continental United States, but there was something about Flight 723 that morning that prickled her instincts. The Denver airport was a hive of motion, the air thick with the scent of jet fuel and coffee, the soft murmur of passengers drifting through the terminal like a low tide. Mara adjusted the straps of her flight jacket, her eyes flicking across the familiar panels of the cockpit as she ran through pre-flight checks. Fuel check, hydraulics green, altimeter set, cabin ready for takeoff. She spoke in a cadence that was automatic, almost ritualistic, yet every word carried the weight of authority. The plane hummed beneath her fingers, its metal skin cold and smooth, the heartbeat of a machine she trusted more than any co-pilot, more than any instruction manual. Her co-pilot, Lieutenant James Holloway, a young man whose enthusiasm sometimes outpaced his judgment, mirrored her movements, clicking switches, nodding at her cues. Mara's eyes scanned the runway from the cockpit windshield, gleaming wet tarmac streaked with the remnants of a night storm. The clouds above were heavy, low, and ominous, a gray curtain that threatened to swallow the sun. Passengers filed into the cabin below. Families with small children clutched oversized backpacks. Business people tapped impatiently on laptops, earbuds tucked deep into ears, oblivious to the weather. Elderly couples shuffled slowly, hands entwined, each step deliberate as though holding on to the morning's fragile calm. Mara glanced at the fuel gauges and systems monitors again, then at the radar. Nothing unusual appeared. The flight plan was routine, a simple trajectory east to Chicago. And yet, there was a flicker in her gut, a sensation that this flight would not be routine. She shook it off, attributing it to the storm clouds pressing down like a weight on the terminal's glass walls. The captain's voice came over the intercom, smooth and reassuring. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We'll be departing shortly. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." A few passengers smiled, comforted by the calm in her tone, unaware of the unease growing inside the cockpit. Mara ran her fingers lightly along the edge of the control panel, the metal slick beneath her fingertips. There was a hum now, almost imperceptible, something that made her pause. She leaned closer to the instruments. Nothing appeared on the radar. The hum grew louder, resonating through the floor of the cockpit, and she could feel it vibrating faintly against her bones. Her eyes flicked to the left engine indicator. A tiny, irregular fluctuation appeared, barely noticeable. Mara frowned. Engines were complex, temperamental. Tiny variances could mean nothing or everything. She reached for the radio, intending to request an early diagnostic check, but the hum intensified, almost melodic in its persistence, threading through her chest. She exchanged a glance with Holloway, whose brow was furrowed as he noticed the same subtle irregularity. "Captain," Holloway said cautiously, "the left engine's reading something off. Not alarming, but unusual." Mara didn't answer immediately. She kept her eyes on the dials, running through mental checklists. "Keep monitoring it," she said finally. "We'll reassess after takeoff." The passengers were still settling. Mara could see a mother soothing a crying child, a young man scrolling frantically through his phone, someone reading the morning paper with a casual detachment that made her stomach twist. She forced herself to focus on routine. Breathe. Pre-flight checks. Runway clearance. Nothing could prepare her for what was coming. The control tower cleared them for takeoff. Mara's hands gripped the throttle, muscles taut, heart beginning a slow, steady beat against the rhythm of anticipation. The engines roared to life beneath them, a controlled fury. Flight 723 began its roll down the runway, the landscape blurring outside the windows. Rain spat against the windshield in jagged lines, turning the world outside into a water-smeared watercolor painting. Then the plane shuddered. A violent tremor ran through the fuselage, subtle at first, almost dismissible. Mara froze for a heartbeat. Holloway's hand hovered over the console. The tremor became a shudder, a violent jolt that made their stomachs lurch. Passengers screamed, voices overlapping in chaos, and Mara's voice cut through the cabin, precise, commanding, unwavering. "Everyone remain calm. Remain seated with seatbelts fastened. She gritted her teeth and adjusted the throttle, fighting against the sudden instability. The left engine gauge flickered violently now, a staccato warning she couldn't ignore. Sparks danced across the panels, tiny, insistent flashes that made her stomach sink. Smoke curled faintly from the engine cowling, acrid and insistent. Mara swallowed hard. Holloway's voice was tight. "Captain, we've got a serious problem." Mara's mind raced. Emergency procedures flooded her consciousness, drilled into her over countless simulations. She had trained for engine failure, for turbulence, for storm conditions, but nothing could simulate the feeling of a plane beneath her hands that seemed to fight against her commands, almost sentient in its rebellion. She glanced at the radar. Nothing. No anomalies, no warning from air traffic control, no incoming storm warnings that could explain the sudden violence. Then she heard it, a faint, distant rumble that wasn't the engines. It vibrated through the fuselage, subtle at first, like the low growl of a predator circling. Her pulse quickened. Outside the windows, the gray clouds shifted unnaturally, as though the sky itself had begun to move with intent. Mara's fingers tightened on the controls, knuckles white. She could feel the fear crawling up her spine, the primal instinct that screamed at her. This is not ordinary. A passenger in the back shouted. The sound ricocheted through the cabin, amplifying the tension already thick in the air. Mara's voice, calm but edged with steel, cut through the rising panic. "Remain calm. Stay seated. We will handle this." Holloway's eyes met hers, wide, reflecting a mixture of fear and trust. Mara gave a curt nod, silently telling him, "We'll get through this." But even she didn't know how. Not yet. Suddenly, the plane shuddered violently again, more severe than before. A strip of metal along the left wing glinted unnaturally, as if catching a brief flash of lightning. Mara's stomach dropped. She reached instinctively for the throttle, her mind moving faster than the alarms that now blared in her ears. Smoke billowed further, curling toward the cockpit like a living thing. And then she realized, with a cold, sinking certainty, this flight was no longer about reaching Chicago. This flight was about survival, hers, her co-pilots, and the 185 souls strapped into the fuselage behind her. Mara inhaled sharply, forcing clarity into the chaos. She could not panic. She could not fail. She had one chance, one slim window to wrest control from the machine and the storm and whatever else lurked in the clouds above. She gripped the yoke tighter. Her mind, razor-sharp, parsed every variable: wind speed, engine output, cabin weight distribution, runway distance. And then the world outside seemed to tilt. A flicker of movement in the gray sky, a shadow, fast, too precise to be lightning, darted across the clouds. Mara's breath caught in her throat. Something was there. Something that wasn't supposed to be. The engine screamed. The plane lurched. Panic surged in the cabin. Mara's voice, unwavering, pierced the fear like a blade. "Hold on, I've got this." Her hands danced over the controls, fighting for every inch of stability. The dashboard flickered again, a warning light blinking insistently. The low rumble outside grew louder, closer, as though the sky itself was leaning in. Mara glanced at Holloway. His face was pale, almost ashen, but his eyes held trust. She nodded. It was time. Whatever was coming, whatever threatened Flight 723, they would face it together. And then a deafening crack split the sky. The plane lurched violently, nearly tipping sideways. Passengers screamed. Mara's stomach dropped, her knuckles white, and her mind raced. This is only the beginning. The cabin erupted into chaos. Screams collided with the shriek of alarms as Flight 723 trembled violently, the fuselage quivering like a living thing in pain. Mara Bennett's voice, sharp and commanding, cut through the panic. "Remain seated. Keep your seatbelts fastened." Her words barely registered to some of the passengers. The mother in 12C clutched her crying child so tightly her knuckles turned white. A businessman in 6F yanked at his seatbelt, fear twisting his face into something unrecognizable. Mara ignored the chaos behind her and focused entirely on the instruments in front of her. The left engine had gone from erratic to catastrophic. Smoke billowed thicker, curling toward the cockpit in a suffocating haze. Sparks danced across the panel, intermittent flashes that lit up her determined face like lightning. Holloway's voice trembled. "Captain, we've lost half our thrust. If this fails," he stopped, unable to finish. He didn't need to, Mara already knew. She swallowed the fear crawling up her throat and recalibrated instantly. Panic was a luxury they couldn't afford. She had a plane full of lives depending on her, 185 souls suspended in terror, clinging to the thin thread of her control. Her eyes scanned the dials and monitors, memorizing every number, every indicator that could guide them through the storm. Lightning split the sky outside, jagged fingers clawing at the dark clouds. Mara could see the horizon distorted, the mountains of Wyoming rising like jagged teeth from the mist below. Her stomach knotted. The runway at Cheyenne Airport was hours away if they followed a direct path, but with a failing engine and violent crosswinds, the approach would be anything but conventional. She took a deep breath and made a decision that would define the rest of the flight. "We're going down, emergency landing," she announced, keeping her voice steady, calm, though her chest hammered with adrenaline. "Holloway, prepare the cabin. Passengers first." Her co-pilot nodded, running through checklists, his hands shaking slightly as he radioed the flight attendants. Down in the cabin, the crew's calm presence was a fragile shield against the tidal wave of panic. Mara could hear snippets of conversations, terrified murmurs and whispered prayers. She knew she had to act fast before fear became chaos. The plane lurched again. A deafening groan of metal twisting under stress reverberated through the fuselage. Mara gritted her teeth, her hands steady despite the tremor that threatened to throw her off balance. She adjusted the throttle, attempting to balance the failing left engine against the remaining power. Every adjustment was precise, deliberate. One wrong move could send the aircraft into a fatal spiral. The passengers were reacting in real time to every shift. A man in row 14 screamed, banging on the seat in front of him. A young woman fainted in the aisle, narrowly caught by a flight attendant. Mara's stomach tightened. The stakes had escalated. This was no longer a flight. This was a battle between human will, mechanical failure, and nature's fury. "Captain," Holloway said, voice tight, "we're losing altitude faster than expected. I can keep us stable for only—" He hesitated, swallowed, then added quietly, "maybe 5 minutes." Mara's mind raced. 5 minutes. That wasn't enough. She needed a plan, and fast. Her eyes flicked to the digital map on the screen. The mountains loomed closer, each jagged peak a potential grave. She adjusted the autopilot minimally, knowing that she would need full manual control for the final approach. Her palms were slick with sweat, but she ignored it. Every passenger, every life depended on her precision. A bolt of lightning struck perilously close, illuminating the cabin in a blinding flash. The plane shuddered violently. Mara felt the vibration through her bones. Panic nipped at her consciousness, but she forced it down. She focused on breathing, on the rhythm of the engines, on the subtle shifts in air pressure that would tell her if she could make the landing. The radio crackled, air traffic control. Their voice was frantic, but Mara tuned it out, trusting only the instruments she could see. There was no time for bureaucratic delays. She had to rely on instinct honed from years of flying, every emergency drill, every split-second decision. Holloway's voice broke again, quieter this time. "Captain, the left wing, there's something wrong." Mara's heart skipped. She scanned the left wing through the window. Sparks had begun to flare along the engine nacelle. A strip of metal glinted unnaturally, and she realized with a sickening clarity that the wing itself might not hold under the stress of a landing. Her jaw tightened. Failure here would not just mean a crash. It would mean a catastrophic breakup of the plane at 30,000 feet. She adjusted the flaps incrementally, her fingers precise, balancing the aerodynamic needs against the failing structure. Every passenger shifted in terror, sensing the plane's subtle movements. A mother screamed, clutching her child as if holding on tightly could shield them from gravity itself. Mara's stomach dropped at the sound. She forced herself to remain calm. Her voice, measured and steady, became the tether holding them together. "We're going to make it," she said, almost to herself. But even as the words left her mouth, doubt clawed at the edges of her mind. Was it true? Could they really survive this descent? The plane lurched again, violently, nearly tipping sideways as a violent gust struck from the right. Mara fought the yoke, her knuckles white, muscles trembling from the constant strain. She could feel the metal bending beneath her touch, the vibration through the floor, the hum of 1,000 systems straining to hold together. She glanced at Holloway. His face was pale, sweat streaking his forehead. Can we make it?" he asked quietly. "We have to," Mara replied, voice firm. "Every second counts." Outside, the mountains loomed closer, jagged peaks slicing into the gray sky. Mara adjusted their trajectory, banking slightly to avoid the tallest ridges. Her stomach lurched with every movement. Lightning cracked, illuminating the snow-dusted slopes, revealing the unforgiving terrain waiting below. Then a terrifying sound, a high-pitched metal shriek from the left wing. Mara froze. Her mind processed it in slow motion. Structural failure. If the wing tore, the plane would roll uncontrollably. They were moments away from total disaster. Her hands flew over the controls. She countered the tremors, balanced the thrust, fought every gust, every uneven vibration. She could hear passengers screaming, crying, praying. She felt their fear as sharply as her own. Mara's thoughts narrowed to a single point: landing. The runway, the possibility of survival, everything else, the engines, the storm, the screaming passengers, became background noise. She had to land. "Brace for turbulence," she shouted, her voice cutting through the cabin. Holloway mirrored her tension, gripping the co-pilot yoke. Mara guided the plane downward, each second stretched into eternity. The altitude dropped. The mountains approached faster than she anticipated. Every decision, every calculation mattered. A passenger screamed again. Mara forced herself to ignore it, focusing on the instruments, on the runway lights. Just a faint glimmer in the distance, barely visible through the storm. She whispered a silent prayer, not for herself, but for the 185 souls strapped into this trembling vessel. And somewhere deep inside, a flicker of hope sparked. They might just survive. But then, as the plane shuddered violently once more, Mara realized the truth. The storm, the failing engine, the wing, they were only the beginning. Something else was out there, something she hadn't yet seen. Something that would test every ounce of her skill, every shred of courage she had left. And as Flight 723 hurtled toward the Earth, Mara Bennett gritted her teeth, knowing that survival was only the first step, and the real danger had yet to reveal itself. The mountains of Wyoming rose like jagged teeth beneath Flight 723. Mara Bennett's hands were white-knuckled on the yoke, each movement precise, every fraction of a degree critical. The plane shuddered violently, as if protesting against her authority, and a low metallic groan vibrated through the cabin, hinting at the structural strain threatening to tear the aircraft apart. Lightning fractured the sky outside, a jagged, violent white streak illuminating the cockpit for a fleeting heartbeat. Mara's eyes flicked to the instruments, airspeed dropping, altitude plummeting, left engine temperature skyrocketing. She could see the faint runway lights in the distance, almost invisible behind a wall of rain, clouds, and night. They were barely a thread of hope amidst the chaos, but it was all they had. "Hold her steady," she muttered to herself, jaw tight, heart hammering. Holloway mirrored her tension beside her, hands trembling but disciplined, eyes scanning the dials with the intensity of someone who understood that the smallest error could mean death. Passengers screamed again, some in terror, others in disbelief, clutching seats, bags, loved ones. Mara could hear the frantic prayers, the cries of children, and the raw, helpless panic that filled the cabin. She forced herself to push it aside. Her focus had to be singular: survive, land, save everyone. The plane lurched violently to the left as a crosswind struck at an impossible angle. Mara fought the yoke, countering with precise movements, balancing aerodynamics against failing engines. She could feel the metal twisting beneath her hands, each vibration a stark reminder of how little room for error remained. The left wing, already stressed, emitted another tortured squeal. Panic threatened to rise in her throat, but she swallowed it, forcing her mind to clarity. "Cabin crew," she shouted over the intercom, her voice firm, unwavering. "Secure yourselves, passengers. Stay down, hold on." Holloway checked the systems again. "Captain, if we can just maintain this glide path, we might reach the airstrip, but I don't know if the wing—" "Then we'll land before it fails," Mara interrupted. Her voice carried a steel she didn't feel, but she forced it. There was no time for hesitation. Lives were balancing on her decisions, on her skill, and on the faint glimmer of a runway far below. The plane dipped sharply as another gust hit from the right. Mara's stomach lurched violently. She forced the nose up slightly, correcting the trajectory just enough to avoid the tallest ridges, but the effort caused another metal groan to echo through the fuselage. Sparks flared along the left wing again, a harsh, violent reminder that they were not safe. Not yet. Her mind raced, calculating everything in real time: wind speed, air pressure, throttle output, angle of descent. Every instinct she had honed over years of flying screamed at her, "You have one chance. One, miss it and it's over." Lightning cracked dangerously close, illuminating the mountains in stark relief. Snow-capped peaks jutted sharply from the darkness, each one a potential death trap if misjudged. Mara adjusted the flaps carefully, fighting the panic clawing at her mind. Every movement mattered. Every second mattered. Below, passengers held on for their lives. Mara could hear muffled screams, prayers whispered in desperate hope, and the faint sound of a child sobbing uncontrollably. A mother clutched her baby as if sheer willpower could protect them. Mara's chest tightened. She felt every emotion as sharply as if it were her own: fear, desperation, hope. Every soul on board depended on her. Holloway's voice broke the taut concentration. "Captain, we're too low. And the wind—" He stopped. The unspoken truth was clear. At this speed, at this altitude, with a failing wing, a small miscalculation would be fatal. Mara didn't respond immediately. Her eyes flicked to the altimeter, then to the windshield, calculating distance, descent angle, runway position. The runway lights were closer now, flickering faintly through the storm, but the plane shuddered again violently. Sparks from the left wing flared like miniature fireworks, illuminating the terrified faces of passengers behind them. The plane lurched sideways, nearly tipping on its side. Mara fought it with everything she had, muscles screaming, palms slick with sweat, mind razor-sharp. She had one chance to correct, one chance to align perfectly with the wet, treacherous runway below. Failure meant not just a crash, it meant fire, metal tearing, screams, death. She gritted her teeth, forcing clarity into every thought. "Throttle just right, flaps steady," she muttered, a mantra against chaos. Holloway mirrored her precision, coaxing the plane to respond as if it were a living, breathing creature, fighting against gravity, wind, and metal fatigue. The passengers screamed again, the sound amplified by panic. Mara didn't flinch. She spoke to the cockpit instruments, to the plane itself, as though her control alone could command survival. Then the left wing screeched sharply, a tortured metal cry. Mara's stomach dropped. She could feel it bending, the integrity weakening. Sparks arced violently across the instrument panel. If the wing tore, the plane would roll uncontrollably. She swallowed hard, forcing adrenaline to steel, calculating adjustments in a heartbeat. "Brace for impact," she muttered under her breath, voice calm but laden with intensity. The runway lights drew closer, glimmering faintly through rain, fog, and storm. Mara adjusted descent angle, throttle, flaps. The plane shuddered, twisted, but she countered every force, a delicate dance of life and death. The landing gear hit the tarmac with a bone-jarring slam. Tires screamed against wet asphalt, sparks flying. Passengers screamed, gripping their seats, hearts in their throats. Mara fought for control, guiding the plane down the runway. The metal groaned under stress, tires skidded, sparks arced. She refused to release control until the plane had shuddered to a complete stop, mere inches from a steep ravine on the runway's edge. Silence crashed into the cabin, heavy, suffocating. The engines hissed, smoke curling from the left nacelle, and passengers gasped, some crying, some trembling in disbelief. Mara's hands were slick with sweat, shaking slightly, but she kept them on the controls. Holloway let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. 185 lives, every one of them, had survived because of her. But as the echoes of fear and relief mixed in the cabin, Mara felt it. The threat wasn't over. The storm, the failing engine, the near-fatal descent, these were only part of it. Something unseen had lurked above, something that had tested her limits and pushed the plane to its breaking point. And as she looked out into the night, at the storm-tossed clouds and the mountains that had nearly claimed them, Mara knew the flight had changed everything. Survival had been won, but the real battle, whatever waited beyond the clouds, had only just begun. The tarmac stretched ahead, slick and glistening in the rain, a fragile ribbon of hope in a storm-tossed world. Mara Bennett's knuckles were white as she gripped the yoke, sweat slicking her palms. Every fiber of her being was focused on one thing: getting Flight 723 safely onto that runway. Behind her, Holloway mirrored her intensity, fingers dancing over the throttle and instrument panel. They were a team bound by urgency, precision, and fear. The plane shuddered violently again as a gust of wind struck from the right, nearly throwing them off alignment. Mara countered immediately, rolling the yoke with a precision born of instinct and countless hours of training. Sparks from the left engine danced across the instrument panel, a dangerous reminder of the wing's stressed metal. Her stomach churned, but she forced herself to breathe evenly, forcing calm over the panic clawing at her chest. Below, the mountains still loomed, their jagged peaks etched against flashes of lightning. She could see the forested slopes approaching, dark and unyielding. Mara's eyes flicked constantly between the instruments and the windshield, calculating descent angle, airspeed, and turbulence with razor-sharp focus. There was no room for error. One misstep, one miscalculation, and this miracle would turn to disaster. "Flaps to 20, she instructed, voice steady. "Throttle steady, don't overcorrect. Holloway, monitor the wing. If it gives, we'll need immediate corrective maneuvers." Holloway nodded, tension etched into every line of his face. He could see the metal bending slightly under stress, the faint glow of sparks curling toward the fuselage. Every passenger behind them was oblivious to the minute-to-minute calculations, the raw fight for survival happening above their heads. They only felt the tremors, the sway, the fear that electrified the cabin. Lightning cracked again, dangerously close. The plane lurched sideways. Mara gritted her teeth and fought the yoke, rolling into the wind, feeling the plane respond almost reluctantly. Each adjustment was a battle against gravity, wind, and failing metal. Her focus narrowed, every thought a single thread: align, descend, land. Below, she could see the faint glow of runway lights. They were closer now, but distorted by rain, fog, and the storm's relentless fury. The plane's nose dipped slightly as she countered turbulence. Sparks erupted again from the wing, arcing like miniature fireworks across the instrument panel. She forced herself to ignore the panic rising in her chest. One step at a time, one adjustment at a time. The landing gear struck the tarmac with a bone-jarring impact. Tires skidded across wet asphalt, sparks flying from the friction, the plane quivering as if it might tear apart under the stress. Mara fought the yoke, countering each vibration, every uneven shift, until the plane finally began to settle. She adjusted the brakes carefully, bringing the aircraft into a controlled deceleration. The tires screamed against the wet runway, smoke curling upward. Passengers screamed, gripping seats, bags, and loved ones, their fear mixing with awe and disbelief. A child's cry echoed through the cabin, muffled by a mother's urgent whisper. Mara didn't allow herself to look back. She couldn't. Her eyes were glued to the runway, to the plane's trembling frame, to the fragile thread holding all 185 lives together. Holloway let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "We made it," he whispered, almost reverently. Mara didn't respond immediately. She maintained control, keeping the plane steady, guiding it to a complete stop mere inches from a steep ravine at the edge of the runway. Her hands shook slightly, sweat dripping from her brow, but she didn't release them. The engines hissed, smoke curling from the left nacelle, sparks still faintly arcing. The plane had survived, but barely. A heavy silence fell over the cabin, broken only by shallow gasps, sobs, and the hiss of cooling engines. Passengers looked around at one another, disbelief etched into every face. Mara allowed herself a brief glance at Holloway, who mirrored the same mixture of relief, exhaustion, and shock. They had just pulled off what seemed impossible. Flight attendants began moving cautiously through the cabin, comforting passengers, helping them unbuckle, guiding them toward the emergency exits just in case. Mara finally allowed herself a small breath, the first real exhalation since takeoff, but relief was fleeting. She knew the danger wasn't over. Her mind raced ahead. The turbulence, the failing engine, the near collapse of the left wing, it was too precise, too sudden. Something had triggered it, and she couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it was hadn't gone away. She glanced at the storm clouds still boiling above the mountains, and a chill ran down her spine. Something out there had tested her. Something unseen had watched her every move. Emergency crews began arriving, fire trucks and ambulances converging on the runway, lights cutting through the darkness. Mara followed protocol, keeping the plane grounded, engines cool, passengers reassured. Yet her thoughts were elsewhere. Something had guided the F-22s she didn't yet understand. The shadow she'd glimpsed during descent lingered in her mind. Was it coincidence or something more? She climbed out of the cockpit, legs trembling from adrenaline, and surveyed the cabin. Every passenger looked alive, stunned, terrified, and grateful all at once. Children clung to their parents, some crying, some wide-eyed with disbelief. A woman in 12D whispered, "I thought we were done for." Mara forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. She wanted to reassure them, to offer comfort, but she knew the truth. She hadn't saved them by chance. She had saved them by a razor-thin margin of skill, instinct, and courage. And yet, in the back of her mind, she knew this was only the beginning. Then, amid the chaos of emergency lights and rushing personnel, her phone vibrated. A single message appeared on the screen from an unknown number. "Good job, Captain. Watch the skis." Mara's pulse jumped. Her fingers trembled as she stared at the words. "Good job. Watch the skis." The calm after the storm had been shattered instantly. She looked up at the dark clouds still boiling above the runway, at the distant mountains shrouded in lightning. A chill ran down her spine. Holloway leaned closer. Who would send a message like that? Mara shook her head slowly. "I don't know, but whoever it is, they know." Her voice was low, tight, but resolute. The implication was clear. The danger that had almost claimed Flight 723 hadn't ended in the landing. Something or someone had been tracking them, testing them, perhaps even controlling the events in the sky. The emergency crews began ushering passengers off the plane. Mara walked down the aisle slowly, every step deliberate, absorbing the relief and fear that clung to the cabin. She caught snippets of conversations, people recounting the terror, the disbelief, the miracle of survival. Every story, every terrified face reinforced the impossible reality. They had made it, against all odds. But Mara couldn't shake the feeling that survival had just opened the door to a much larger mystery. The spark in the clouds, the precise timing of the storm, the flicker of something unnatural in the sky, it all hinted at forces she couldn't yet comprehend. And then there was the message, brief and cryptic, that hinted at a presence beyond ordinary comprehension. She looked up at the storm one last time, rain dripping from her jacket, lightning illuminating the dark clouds above. Flight 723 had touched the earth, Lives had been spared, but Mara Bennett knew this was only the beginning. The sky had spoken, and someone, or something, was waiting, watching. Her phone buzzed again, another message. "Next time, you won't have a runway." Mara's breath caught. The air, heavy with rain and electricity, seemed suddenly oppressive, charged with a tension that went far beyond the storm. The passengers had survived, but Mara knew deep in her bones that the real test, the one that would challenge everything she knew about skill, courage, and fate, was still coming. And as she stared at the darkened sky above the Wyoming mountains, she understood the truth. Flight 723 had landed safely, but the real danger was just beginning. The storm had passed, but the shadows were still there, and someone, or something, was waiting to call her back into the sky. The runway lights faded behind her as Mara Bennett walked briskly toward the emergency vehicles, rain soaking through her jacket, hair plastered to her forehead. Every step carried the adrenaline still thrumming through her veins, but her mind refused to release the tension. Flight 723 had landed, the passengers were alive, and yet Mara felt an unease that no calm words or relieved faces could wash away. Something out there in the sky hadn't been ordinary. The airport's control tower was buzzing with activity. Air traffic controllers frantically relayed information to fire crews, police, and medics, but Mara's attention was pulled elsewhere. She had noticed it during the descent, small blips on the radar, something fast, precise, almost deliberate, that didn't correspond to any known aircraft. The thought gnawed at her. They weren't alone in that storm. Holloway caught up with her, drenched and shaken. "Captain, I'm not sure what we just survived. That turbulence, the left engine, nothing about it made sense." His voice was tight, raw with the memory of near death. "I know," Mara said quietly, her eyes scanning the stormy sky above the mountains. "And I think we weren't just fighting a storm." He frowned. "What do you mean?" Mara paused, hesitant to speak it aloud. "During descent, I saw something. I don't know what, fast, almost invisible. And those radar blips, they weren't ours. They weren't anything the control tower detected normally." Holloway shivered, and she felt the same chill that had been crawling up her spine since takeoff. Something, or someone, had been monitoring them, or worse, manipulating events. The first sign that her instincts were correct came minutes later. 2 F-22 fighter jets appeared on the horizon, descending with precision that seemed almost choreographed. Mara's eyes widened. Military aircraft didn't just scramble to intercept a commercial plane for a failed engine. Not without cause. Not without orders from the highest levels. A crackling voice broke through the cockpit radio as Mara approached. "Phoenix 1, do you copy?" Her heart skipped a beat. Phoenix 1. That was her military call sign, one she had never used outside her training. She froze, staring at the jets descending from the storm. The pilots in the cockpits moved with synchronicity, like dancers in a deadly ballet, perfectly mirroring one another. Holloway's jaw dropped. "Captain, they're calling you." Mara swallowed hard, pulse pounding. She hadn't signed up for this. She was a commercial pilot, not a covert operative. And yet the F-22s had responded to her. They were here because of her. The radio crackled again. "Phoenix 1, do you copy? We were assigned to protect you. Follow protocol." The weight of those words pressed down on her chest. "Protect me," she whispered, incredulous. "Why? What the hell is going on?" The jets formed a protective formation above Flight 723, their presence both reassuring and terrifying. Mara felt a shiver of adrenaline. She had just saved 185 lives from near-certain death, and now she realized she had been drawn into something far bigger, something she couldn't yet comprehend. Radar operators were already gathered around the airport's control room screens, their faces pale as they processed the unusual flight data. The storm, the engine failure, and the precise coordination of the F-22s were anomalies that no one could explain. Every system had behaved as if an invisible hand was guiding the events in real time. Mara knew she had to act. She moved to the command post at the airport, where a team of officials and military liaisons were already gathering. Screens displayed the storm's trajectory, flight paths, and radar anomalies. One of the officers, a tall man with piercing gray eyes, approached her. "Captain Bennett," he said gravely, "I know this is unexpected, but you need to understand something. Your flight wasn't just a commercial route. You were in the path of a highly classified operation. The aircraft you saw or felt interfering with your flight were likely associated with our monitoring systems. You saved more than just the passengers." Mara's pulse quickened. "Saved more than the passengers," she repeated, trying to comprehend. "What are you talking about?" The officer's expression was unreadable. "You were unknowingly in the trajectory of sensitive airspace. Anomalies detected on your route could have jeopardized national security. The F-22s were scrambled to intercept any threat and ultimately to ensure your survival. Your decisions, your skill, and your instinctive actions prevented a potentially catastrophic scenario." Mara's mind spun. She had landed a plane under impossible circumstances, but now she realized those circumstances weren't random. Something or someone had orchestrated them, deliberately testing her abilities, pushing her to her limits. Holloway, standing beside her, broke the silence. "Are you saying this was intentional, that we were part of a test?" The officer didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gestured to a radar screen where faint, ghostly blips moved with unnatural speed. "We don't know everything yet," he admitted, "but preliminary scans suggest highly advanced aerial vehicles operating beyond normal detection. They were tracking Flight 723 the entire time. Whether their intent was hostile, experimental, or protective is unclear. But Captain, you were at the center of it." Mara felt a chill run down her spine. The flight had been more than a near disaster. It had been a carefully orchestrated, or at least monitored, event, and she had unknowingly become the linchpin in a situation that could have spiraled into catastrophe. Her phone buzzed again, the cryptic message still lingering in her mind. "Good job, Captain. Watch the skis." Now, with confirmation from military authorities, the message made terrifying sense. Someone had been watching. Someone had known what she was capable of. The officer continued, "Your skills are exceptional. We believe you may be uniquely qualified to respond to future situations that exceed normal human capability. Flight 723 demonstrated your ability to handle extreme variables under duress and still prioritize life above all else." Mara swallowed hard, trying to process it. She had survived a storm, saved her passengers, and now she was being told that what she had faced was only the beginning of something far more complex. A radar operator suddenly gasped. Mara turned to see the blips on the screen shifting again, moving faster, disappearing and reappearing. "Captain," the operator said, voice tense, "whatever was following your flight may still be in the area." Mara's pulse quickened. The storm had passed, but the threat, or mystery, had not. She felt the weight of the moment pressing on her chest. Flight 723 had landed safely, but she now understood the terrifying truth. Survival had only opened the door to a far larger challenge, one that involved forces she couldn't yet comprehend, advanced technology beyond ordinary human reach, and perhaps even enemies that were invisible. Holloway looked at her, fear and awe warring in his eyes. "So, what do we do now?" Mara's gaze hardened, her mind sharpening with resolve. "We stay alert, we find out what's happening, and we make sure nothing and no one threatens the people under our care again." Outside, the storm clouds churned over the mountains, dark and foreboding. Mara knew instinctively that the F-22s above were not the last players in this game. Someone, or something, was still out there, waiting, watching, testing. And somewhere, above the storm-tossed Wyoming sky, a presence was ready to call her back. Mara Bennett stepped onto the tarmac, her boots sinking slightly into the rain-soaked asphalt. The emergency crews were finally winding down their operations. passengers being escorted into waiting buses and ambulances. Yet Mara's attention was elsewhere on the distant roar that had returned, a sound sharper and more precise than any engine she had ever heard. Above the clouds, two F-22 Raptor jets cut through the storm with surgical precision. Their movements were fluid, almost mechanical, but deliberate. They descended in a protective formation above the grounded Flight 723. Mara froze, heart pounding as the thought hit her. These were not random aircraft. They were searching for her. The radio crackled, slicing through the hum of rain and machinery. "Phoenix 1, do you copy?" Her blood ran cold. Phoenix 1. Her military call sign, one she hadn't used in years, one she had never imagined anyone outside her training would know. Mara's hands shook slightly as she gripped the radio. "This is Captain Bennett. I copy," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. There was a pause, a tension that seemed to stretch across the skis themselves. Then the voice came again, calm, authoritative, yet layered with urgency. "We were assigned to protect you. Follow protocol." Mara blinked, trying to process the words. "Protect me? Why?" she asked, her mind racing. She had just landed a plane under impossible conditions. Why would she now require protection? Holloway, standing at her side, could see the storm reflected in her eyes. "Captain, this is serious," he whispered. "They're not messing around." She didn't answer immediately. Her gaze drifted to the jets above, their engines slicing through clouds, turbulence parting around them like obedient shadows. Something about the precision of their movements unnerved her. They were not simply guarding, they were observing, calculating, testing. Suddenly, the radio crackled again. "Phoenix 1, your actions saved more than passengers. Your instincts, your decisions. They prevented a critical security breach. We require your compliance in assisting with further operations." Mara felt the words like a physical blow. Critical security breach. Further operations. She had no idea what she was being pulled into. She looked at Holloway, whose face mirrored her own disbelief. "What do they mean?" Holloway asked quietly. Mara shook her head, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down. She was a commercial pilot, not a soldier. And yet, in that moment, she understood something fundamental. Her skills, her instincts, and her courage had drawn her into a sphere far larger than a single flight. A sudden gust of wind rattled the plain behind her, and a flash of lightning illuminated the jagged Wyoming mountains. Mara's pulse quickened. The storm had calmed for a moment, but the presence above made it clear. Whatever had guided the F-22s to her was still watching, still testing. One of the jets banked slightly, aligning perfectly with her view. She felt a shiver run down her spine. Mara realized that this was no ordinary flight interception. Someone, somewhere, had marked her. Her call sign, her actions, her instinctive heroism. Someone had recognized it all. "Captain Bennett," the voice on the radio continued, "your compliance is required immediately. We are en route to the designated command center. Coordinates transmitted." Mara hesitated. Fear, exhaustion, and adrenaline collided within her. She had just saved 185 lives. She had just landed a plane that should have been destroyed by nature and circumstance. And now, she was being called to step into a world she didn't understand. Holloway placed a hand on her shoulder. "Mara, you've handled every impossible thing thrown at you so far. Maybe this is the next step." She swallowed hard. He was right. Hesitation could cost more than fear. Her instincts, honed over thousands of flight hours and unimaginable pressure, told her this was not a choice, it was a necessity. "Fine," she said finally, voice low but resolute. "We go, but I need answers." The F-22s adjusted formation, descending to escort them to a waiting helicopter on the edge of the airfield. Mara's mind raced as she climbed into the aircraft. Every detail from the flight replayed in her memory: the failing engine, the shuddering wing, the storm that had felt almost alive. And now, the presence above suggested that the storm had not been random. that Flight 723 had been only the beginning of a test she had unknowingly passed. Inside the helicopter, the rotors chopping against the storm's remnants, Mara finally allowed herself to breathe. Yet the tension remained, coiled tight in her chest. She looked at Holloway, whose eyes were wide, reflecting the storm outside. "They're not just protecting us," he said quietly. "They're watching, learning, or maybe judging." Mara nodded grimly. "Judging," she agreed. She had spent years relying on instinct and skill, but the presence above suggested that even that might not be enough. Whatever awaited her at the command center was something far beyond normal human calculation, and it demanded more than courage. It demanded precision, intelligence, and fearlessness. The helicopter touched down at a secluded airbase hidden in the folds of the Wyoming mountains. Mara stepped out into a world she hadn't anticipated: black SUVs, armed personnel, and a sense of controlled urgency that radiated from every figure. This was no routine emergency response. This was something else entirely. A tall officer with a stern face approached her, eyes sharp, calculating. "Captain Bennett," he said, "your performance today has been extraordinary, but the situation is far from over. What you experienced, Flight 723, the storm, the radar anomalies, is only the beginning. We need your cooperation. Are you willing?" Mara met his gaze, pulse racing, mind sharpening into clarity. She had survived the impossible once, and she had saved 185 lives. Now, survival alone would not be enough. "I'll cooperate," she said, voice firm, "but I need to know what I'm walking into." The officer gave a slight nod, almost approvingly. "You'll know soon enough. For now, know this: the F-22s above weren't random. Your call sign isn't just a designation. It's a recognition of skill, intuition, and resilience. And they're not just protecting you, they're entrusting you with what comes next." Mara's mind raced. Entrusted? With what? She didn't yet understand the scope, the danger, or the magnitude of what lay ahead. But instinctively she knew one thing: her life, and possibly the lives of countless others, was about to change forever. Outside, the storm clouds still churned over the mountains, lightning flickering behind them. Somewhere in that sky, the F-22s hovered, waiting, watching, ready to respond. And somewhere deeper, an unknown force had marked her, acknowledging her skill, her bravery, and her ability to survive the impossible. Mara Bennett had saved 185 lives. But now the world above her, in the skis she had navigated so expertly, had recognized her. And the next call, whatever it was, would demand everything she had and more. As she followed the officer into the command center, her heart pounded with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The storm had passed, the passengers were safe, but the sky still called to her. And she knew, deep down, that Flight 723 was only the prologue. The real mission, the real danger, and the real test were just beginning. The command center was a fortress of steel and glass nestled deep in the Wyoming mountains, its entrance unmarked, guarded by personnel whose eyes betrayed both discipline and wariness. Mara Bennett stepped inside, her boots echoing sharply against the polished concrete floor. Every step felt weighted, as though the gravity of the past few hours pressed against her chest. She had saved 185 lives, faced a storm that seemed almost sentient, and now she was about to confront a reality she had never imagined. The room was vast, filled with monitors displaying radar data, satellite imagery, and feeds Mara didn't recognize. A low hum of computers and machinery filled the air, punctuated by the occasional clipped command. Officers and analysts moved with precise urgency, their faces set with focus and tension. Mara's eyes were drawn to the center of the room, where a figure stood silhouetted against a massive digital map of the United States. The man turned as she approached, tall, broad-shouldered, with a presence that radiated authority. His gray eyes, sharp and unflinching, fixed on her with unsettling intensity. "Captain Bennett," he said, his voice deep, calm, and commanding, "Welcome, I am Director Hawk. Please follow me." Mara's stomach tightened. "Director Hawk," she repeated cautiously, keeping her tone neutral. "I need answers. What exactly happened today? What were those blips on the radar? Why were the F-22s responding to me?" Hawk nodded slowly, gesturing toward a bank of monitors. "All in good time. But first, understand this. What you experienced was no accident. The storm, the mechanical failure, the radar anomalies, they were all part of an event that was being closely monitored by multiple agencies. And you, Captain, were the central variable." Mara's brow furrowed. "Central variable? I saved my passengers, I flew the plane. That's instinct and training. What do you mean, central variable?" Hawk's expression remained unreadable. Flight 723 was on a path that intersected with what we classify as high-priority anomalous activity. Unknown aerial phenomena, operating at speeds and altitudes beyond conventional human or technological capacity, were detected along your route. You were the first civilian pilot to encounter these anomalies directly. Mara's mind reeled. Unknown aerial phenomena. Are you telling me I wasn't just dealing with a storm? Hawk nodded, the lines of his face deepening. Correct. Your flight path and response became a test of human capability. Your actions were logged in real time. You demonstrated decision-making, instinctive adaptation, and leadership under conditions we could not simulate. Holloway, standing beside Mara, swallowed audibly. So, all of that, the turbulence, the failing engine, the wing, it wasn't just random. Not entirely, Hawk confirmed. Some variables were natural, some were engineered. The combination was designed to assess and push human limits. You excelled, Captain Bennett. That is why the F-22s were dispatched. They weren't just escorting you, they were responding to ensure your safety while gathering data on your decision-making under extreme duress. Mara felt a chill run through her. Data, my decisions. Yes, Hawk said. And it doesn't end there. The messages you received, the ones on your phone, they were not random either. They were intended to communicate your success and to warn you that further tests and missions may be required. You have been identified as someone uniquely capable of handling scenarios that are beyond ordinary human reaction and judgment. Mara's stomach tightened. The weight of his words pressed down on her. She had trained for emergencies, for life-or-death situations, for split-second decisions. But this was something else entirely. She was no longer just a pilot. She had become a critical node in a network designed to confront threats that even the most advanced technology could not fully predict. Hawk's gaze sharpened. Captain, we are on the verge of a situation that may demand your full skill set, your intuition, and your courage. The anomalies detected are increasing in frequency and intensity, and whatever they are watching, waiting, learning. Mara's mind flashed back to the storm, the flicker of movement she had seen above the clouds, the impossible coordination of the F-22s. It all made sense now. She had not merely survived a flight. She had passed an initiation of sorts, a test she hadn't even known she was taking. Holloway's voice broke the tense silence. So, what do we do now? Hawk's eyes met Mara's, unwavering and sharp. Now, Captain, you prepare. You will be trained, briefed, and embedded within operations designed to counter, intercept, or understand these anomalies. You are not alone in this. The F-22s, our personnel and select experts will coordinate with you. But you, your instincts, your decisions, will be central. Mara took a deep breath, absorbing the enormity of what he was saying. She had spent years in the cockpit, thinking of emergencies in terms of engines, weather, and human error. Now, the variables were beyond human comprehension, and she had been singled out because she could navigate chaos better than anyone else. Director Hawk continued, his voice cutting through her racing thoughts. There will be dangers, Captain, situations you cannot predict, risks that are unprecedented. But your performance today has proven that you are capable. Flight 723 was the proof. You have the skill, the courage, and the instinct to face the unknown." Mara's gaze drifted to the monitors. They displayed images of the anomalies she had only glimpsed, a blur of movement, speed beyond detection, objects appearing and disappearing at impossible rates. She felt a shiver of both fear and awe. The storm had been a warning. The F-22s had been guardians. And now the real mission, the one that required every ounce of her skill, was beginning. Hawk's expression softened slightly, just enough to convey gravity without condescension. "Captain Bennett, the skis will call you again. And when they do, the world may depend on your choices. Flight 723 was the beginning. The real test is coming." Mara swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. She had survived, she had saved 185 lives, and she had faced the impossible. But as she stood in the command center, absorbing the truth of her new reality, she realized that the real battle, against forces that operated beyond normal human understanding, had only just begun. Outside, through the glass walls of the command center, the Wyoming storm clouds churned, dark and foreboding, lightning flickering within them. Somewhere in that sky, the F-22s hovered, silent sentinels ready to respond. And somewhere beyond, the anomalies waited, watching, judging, waiting for the next move. Mara Bennett straightened, eyes narrowing, jaw set. She had survived the impossible once. She had saved countless lives. And now, called by her own call sign, she was about to step into a world where skill, instinct, and courage would be tested like never before. The storm had passed for the passengers of Flight 723, but Mara knew, deep in her bones, that the real mission, the real danger, and the real test of her life were only beginning. Mara Bennett stood on the tarmac, the Wyoming wind whipping through her hair, carrying the faint scent of rain and ozone from the dissipating storm. Her fingers tightened around her flight jacket, and her eyes scanned the sky, now a turbulent canvas of lingering clouds streaked with lightning. Above, the two F-22s hovered with lethal precision, engines whispering a mechanical promise of protection, or perhaps judgment. She had been briefed, trained, and instructed. She knew the anomalies, the unidentified aerial phenomena, were real, intelligent, and possibly hostile. She knew her decisions in the cockpit of Flight 723 had been monitored, assessed, logged in real time. And now, for the first time, she was being tasked not merely with surviving, but confronting. A voice crackled over the comms, crisp and controlled. "Phoenix 1, do you copy? Engage Protocol Delta Alpha. Confirm visual on anomaly cluster." Mara's pulse spiked. "Copy that," she replied, her voice steady despite the rapid rhythm of her heartbeat. She climbed into the cockpit of a modified fighter aircraft stationed at the edge of the tarmac. This was not a commercial plane. This was a machine built for war, precision, and speed, a perfect extension of her instincts, honed over countless hours of life-and-death scenarios. The engines roared to life beneath her, a vibration that shook her bones and ignited adrenaline. She could feel every tremor, every pulse of the aircraft, and in that moment she became one with the machine. Above, the anomalies awaited, flickering blips on the radar, objects moving with impossible speed and accuracy, disappearing and reappearing in ways that defied physics. "Visual contact confirmed," the F-22 leader announced. "Maintain formation. Engage only if necessary." Mara's eyes narrowed. The anomalies moved with a coordination that was almost tactical, almost intelligent. They darted through the clouds, weaving around lightning strikes as if daring her to follow. She tightened her grip on the yoke. "You're ready for this," she muttered under her breath, echoing the confidence she had forced herself to summon during Flight 723. Every emergency, every split-second decision had led to this moment. She had survived the impossible before, and now she would face it again. But this time, she was not alone. The anomalies accelerated, converging toward a narrow air corridor over the mountains. Mara adjusted her trajectory, matching their speed, feeling the limits of human and machine capability converge. Lightning flared around her, illuminating the sky in violent staccato bursts. Each flash revealed the anomalies in brief glimpses, sleek metallic forms, moving with precision and intelligence that seemed almost conscious. Approaching cluster, the F-22 wingman reported, "Stand by." Mara's breath caught. She could see the objects now shimmering, almost translucent, moving with an elegance that was alien. Her instincts screamed caution, yet her training urged action. These were no ordinary threats. They were tests, scouts, or agents of something larger, and she had been chosen to confront them. Her hands moved over the controls, adjustments precise and instinctive. "Stay in formation," she instructed over the comms. "Watch their patterns, anticipate, don't engage unless provoked." The anomalies shifted suddenly, a synchronized maneuver that caused Mara to instinctively pull the yoke back, climbing sharply. Thunder exploded around her, the plane shuddering under the strain. Sparks danced along the fuselage as the aircraft resisted the violent forces, responding only to her direct, intuitive commands. One anomaly broke from the cluster, darting directly toward her. Time seemed to stretch. She could see the shimmer of its surface, reflecting the storm like liquid metal. The F-22s flanked her, engines screaming, missiles locked, but Mara hesitated. She didn't need to fire, she needed to understand. The object veered at the last moment, avoiding direct confrontation, and she realized something chilling. These were not merely hostile. They were testing her, probing her instincts, measuring her reactions. Every maneuver she made, every decision was catalogued, observed, evaluated. Her pulse raced. She adjusted her trajectory, weaving through the mountains, countering turbulence, lightning, and the anomalies' unpredictable movements. The sky itself seemed alive, a vast arena for this deadly, intricate ballet. She could feel the limits of human capability pressing against her mind and body, but she pushed forward, instinct and skill fused into one unbroken line of focus. Minutes passed like hours. Every second was a calculus of survival and observation. Then, a sudden opening appeared, a gap in the storm clouds. Sunlight pierced the gray, illuminating the mountains below. The anomalies paused at the edge of the light, then, without warning, dispersed, vanishing into the storm as quickly as they had appeared. The F-22s flanked her silently, maintaining formation. Mara exhaled deeply, her body trembling from the tension. She had survived, maneuvered, and endured a test unlike any other. She had not only faced the storm and mechanical failure, but had now confronted entities that defied understanding. "Report," the F-22 wingman's voice crackled over the comms. They've withdrawn," Mara said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. "But this isn't over. They were assessing, testing, judging." A voice crackled from the command center over the comms. "Phoenix 1, your performance exceeded all expectations. The anomalies are still active, but your actions today have provided critical data. Stand down and return to base." Mara nodded, even though no one could see her. Her chest heaved, sweat and adrenaline coursing through her body. She had survived the impossible twice in a matter of hours. Flight 723 and now the anomalies themselves. The return flight was tense but uneventful. The storm had passed, leaving only the fractured clouds and the calm after a tempest. Mara glanced at the F-22s flying beside her, the sleek, lethal machines' silent guardians. She felt a strange mixture of pride and unease. She had passed the tests, but the anomalies remained, invisible and inscrutable, their purpose unknown. When she landed at the hidden airbase, the command center greeted her with quiet efficiency. Director Hawk met her at the tarmac, his expression unreadable. "You've proven yourself," he said simply. "Today you didn't just survive, you adapted, led, and understood. That is rare." Mara felt the exhaustion hitting her all at once. Her hands shook slightly, her mind buzzing from the intensity of the day. "And the anomalies?" she asked quietly. Hawk's eyes held hers, sharp and unwavering. "They are still out there, waiting, watching, But they now know one thing with certainty: Phoenix One will not falter. Mara nodded, a shiver running down her spine. She had been tested, measured, and recognized by forces far beyond ordinary human comprehension. And now she understood the truth. The skis had called her, and she had answered. But somewhere deep in the clouds, beyond the reach of human sight, the anomalies lingered. The real journey was only beginning. Mara Bennett had saved 185 lives, survived the impossible, and faced the unknown. The storm had passed, but the call of the sky, the call that had always demanded courage, instinct, and skill, would return. And when it did, she would rise to meet it. The F-22s lifted off into the distance, silent shadows against the fatting storm. Mara stood on the tarmac, the wind at her back, and whispered under her breath, "Good, I'm ready." And somewhere far above the Wyoming mountains, the skis listened.